I find myself reflecting on language a lot. Language and embodiment, really. I think about these things a lot in part because of, I spent some time with a friend yesterday and I found myself having some of the chronic illness symptoms that show up for me. And because they have really intense cognitive consequences, like um, sometimes after a conversation, I'll feel my brain exhausted. And then I came home and my roommate started to talk with me, and I was just like, brain have no talk energy. And really, brain have had no listen energy either. And the thing is, I know that there are capacities and ways of communicating that aren't as extractive and effortful as what we normally end up doing. At least that's how I perceive things. Like, it's so often the case that we're not actually aware of what we're orienting to as we're communicating. So often we're talking at each other. Can't tell if that's off center or not, but it looks that way. Oh, that looks better, I think. So often we're just thinking out loud or talking at each other or thinking at each other. Playing out social scripts that we don't actually know are nourishing. It's just all we know. We're so used to shaping and contorting our nervous systems into particular shapes. And developing a chronic illness that has pretty intense cognitive symptoms, um, it makes it so clear how we immediately jump into a particular way of, you know, particular script or a particular game we're playing and how limited it is. And this is a lot of where my work tends to focus. Embodied communication, how to track our nervous systems, how to communicate in the ways that feel most natural to us and between us and the people we care about. It's really, language is always emergent. That means it's not a static, concrete thing, but instead something that's always shifting and changing and adapting to meet the moment. Except many of us, most of us, most of the culture around us is playing out the same scripts over and over, as opposed to flexibly adapting to meet the moment. So much of why so many of us end up burned out, chronically ill, depressed, anxious, is because we don't have the tools to calibrate ourselves and each other to the just right levels in different settings. So instead, we shape ourselves, really shape our nervous systems and emotional, relational selves into really funky shapes so we can make it through at work, and then collapse in particular ways to try to rest and recover. And I hope that doesn't sound too cynical. I think there's plenty of people who do fine. But yeah, there's something that consistently calls me towards finding the ways of communicating that feel natural and nourishing, and then support generativity that's much more sustainable than the type of intense performance and productivity demands that are currently extracting so much of our vitality. It's like there are so many layers and levels and textures of intimacy that we barely tap into. That are just kind of down to earth and easy and available. If we just know our nervous systems better and communicate from there, as opposed to just communicating from the thought world. Because that's what almost all of our communication is. It's almost all thought. We meet people and we catch up. How have you been? Then I tell you a story, thoughts about how I've been. Maybe dipping into emotion some here and there. And that emotion that we talk about is typically narrativized and about particular performances of vulnerability too that aren't always all that great either. At least we have a limited range. But we talk about ourselves in that way, and then we might talk about politics. We might talk about our relationships. We might talk about art or music or television and movies or sports, opinions. And none of these things are bad, but they all are filtered through layers of processing. And our relational diet thus becomes heavily, heavily processed, like ultra processed. And especially if you've internalized a ton of ideas about who you should be, how you should perform, how you should measure up to others, and you're operating in a world where others have those expectations of you, you have expectations of others. We end up filtering through so many layers, we don't know what's whole grain, unprocessed us versus processed. And then we get glimpses of feeling unprocessed and natural. And those are beautiful, and they might point us towards people that are important people for us. But our language and social scripts aren't built to make those glimpses more than glimpses. Where naturalness is just fucking normal. Naturalness is hard to find. Or maybe it's not. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I know I say that a lot. And I hope it doesn't come off as me being dismissive of my own perceptions, but it's also it's meant to be an invitation for you to find out for yourself. And that my hope with sharing these things isn't that my expertise um, becomes a product, but instead that it invites you into your own wisdom, to your own way of understanding the world. I'm not here to offer a system to live by, but instead, hopefully, just a graceful invitation for you to find your way. Yeah, so a lot of the work I end up doing and what I build into my life is relationships that center a lot of embodied communication. And at any given moment, what's the barest truth that you know that you can speak? Obviously, any level of concept involves some type of processing. Me labeling a particular feeling is a layer of that. But what's the minimal level that of processing that allows you to communicate as directly as possible? When I say that there's, an opening in my heart, an opening in my chest, spaciousness there, or whatever. And that's pretty simple and direct and can't particularly be argued with. But if I go, there's a spaciousness, there's an openness in my heart because, then that because becomes is an additional layer of processing. And the more layers of analysis, the more processing there is. And before you know it, I'm not even aware of what's happening in my chest or my belly or maybe anywhere in my body. Even I might not even be aware that what I'm saying is thoughts and that it has layers of processing happening. Thus, I'm fucking throwing Oreos at you. Ultra processed metaphor. I don't know if that's lost on people or not. It's pretty fun to just get up here and riff. But what I find is when I connect from a place where my language is more embodied and tracking what's happening in real time, and the other people or person, and the other people I'm involved with, whether it's just one other person or multiple, and we're tracking primarily that base layer of experience, it's much easier to attune to the just right level of connectedness. The level of connectedness that is revealing itself all the time, as opposed to living through agenda or script about where I'm supposed to go, what it's supposed to feel like, what it's supposed to be. And that feels typically ends up feeling more spacious and easeful. It's not that it doesn't have its edges. It's just as risky as any other form of relating. But often what I see is that when shifts in connection go poorly, it's often because there's a lot of emotional relational hygiene between people that hasn't been attuned to and honored. When I can honor my system and I'm operating with other people that do so, we can dance with the micro movements of connection, with the cycles of growth and decay that happen in all connection. There's cycles of growth and decay in a single conversation. There's the growth and decay of the level of energy for conversation around particular topics. But we treat decay as bad. We get latched onto ideas of where things should go, and we try to get ourselves there or stop ourselves from going to places we don't think we should go. And those aren't inherently bad things, but we have such lacking sort of emotional relational dexterity, like fine motor movements, that we're stumbling around like fucking infants, man. It's like over the course of our education, you start off in preschool, kindergarten, and before that, learning 1, 2, 3s, simple addition and subtraction coming in as you get a little bit older. Then multiplication and division. More complex things start to show up. Algebra, geometry. And the thing is, we get to be adults, and most people haven't actually really integrated the 1, 2, 3s, the ABCs, the simple addition and subtraction of tracking what's happening in your system in real time and communicating that in the real-time dance. And so we try to do these higher order things, these higher level things of really complex agreements, like agreeing to be in a lifelong partnership. It's like getting drafted into the NBA when you have never dribbled a basketball. I'm gonna be a professional in a relationship. I'm gonna sign up for one of the most challenging projects you can take on relationally is a lifelong commitment. And many people do that without even knowing what it feels like to be in their bodies. I know, because I saw them for therapy. I see them for coaching sometimes. My coaching clients that have been drawn to me have usually had more of a basis of some of that stuff, but even then. Rarely do we know just what whole grain communication and connection feels like, what the unprocessed food of connection feels like. We get high off of new relationship energy and projections of what that means. And those things aren't bad. They just need to be part of a healthy diet if you don't want to get relationally sick over and over and over. And I don't know if you've looked around, but there's a lot of relational illness going around. in various ways. Doesn't mean it's always happening in relationships. Some people are chronically disconnected from others and single, or have partnerships that are just flat, and they accept and live with that because it's what it is. I don't know. Really, there's just so much nourishment that's readily available with just a little bit of the right orientation, a little bit of tapping into our capacities. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be that vulnerable. I'm not particularly here for vulnerability's sake. The performance of vulnerability. Yes, intimacy involves vulnerability, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is fucking nourishment. Getting resourced, feeling good. The type of feeling good that's sustainable. That's the really sort of sober nourishment. Not that intoxicating forms of nourishment are inherently bad. Again, it's about a healthy balance, moderation, diet, whatever. It's the type of sobriety that has no argument with intoxication. It's the type of sobriety where the intoxication that comes along is completely part of the natural, healthy choicefulness, I guess. But yeah, it's not about vulnerability, it's about naturalness, finding those places, those people, those ways of connecting where your voice, your movement, your ways of dancing with the other feel just naturally spontaneous, easily spontaneous. Nourishment. Feeding each other in ways that don't take and extract from each other. Take and extract energy isn't inherently bad. It's just not sustainable without healthful forms leading the way. And yeah, also generativity too. The place of creativity and productivity, healthy performance. None of those things are bad, but they can be more sustainable when we track our systems and the shared relational system. All of these things are processes of co-regulation and attunement. Co-regulation just being the notion that our nervous systems are always impacting each other, and thus impacting the regulation of each individual in the system and the system itself. Simple example, if you have a conflict with a coworker, you're in a meeting that you didn't know that they were going to come to, and you're sitting there, and then they walk into the room, your nervous system is going to tense up in some sort of way. Or simply put, like, if I shift my nervous system and I start talking faster, maybe throw more concepts at you, maybe start poking in some sort of way, your nervous system's going to have some sort of response. But when I talk the way my body wants to talk, actually enjoy talking, talk in a way that doesn't have the pressure of needing to extract something from myself. And that probably has an impact on your nervous system too. Not to say it's not necessarily comfortable or good either way. We all have different nervous systems and different relationships to the beings and voices in front of us and such. But the co-regulation process is always happening, but our language doesn't speak to it. It doesn't prioritize it. And I really think it can be harnessed in service of much greater ways of navigating connectivity and basic well-being. And good co-regulation transparent without forcing vulnerability. Forcing vulnerability is awful. If you've ever been in bad group therapy, it's bad. But good co-regulation leads to attunement. And the way I define good attunement is just being at the just right level of intimacy between oneself and another. And everything we do is an intimacy practice. Everything we do relationally, at least. Like good attunement with the cashier at the grocery store is having the right level of small talk. To be friendly but not uncomfortable. And with a friend, it's the right level of touch, the right types of topics to talk about that feel good, the right level of emotional intimacy for our level of trust. And the thing is, we have these very compartmentalized and often more rigidly defined than we realize relationships, where, our romantic partner is available just for particular types of intimacy. And then our friends are a particular way, fit in a particular box and particular scripts, and then our coworkers and acquaintances and whatever. But we have a much, much, much more nuanced and broad range than we typically tap into. And there's a lot of freedom available in that, and I think it's a lot of what the world needs at the moment too. How do we find traction in relating to each other so we can communicate better to navigate the extremely complex issues? Even if at the primary level, a big collective issue does have a black and white, right and wrong, the addressing of it, the human level of it, is infinitely complex. And infinite complexity requires the type of intuitiveness and embodiment and creativity and curiosity that can't be touched by our current ways of doing things, I don't think. That can barely be touched by it, I should say. It's calling for emotional relational innovation. At least there's lots of room for it in the context of a world that has lots of other layers of addressing the problems and creating caring culture, nourishing culture. culture that centers well-being. Sounds nice. Then again, you know, I could be off base, but I'm putting myself out there with the notion that I think I'm onto something, and I think I might be of value. So I share my perspective freely. And if you're interested in connecting more, contact information below. Hope y'all are doing well.